Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from today, and good evening. I know one of our panelists is actually in a different time zone, but we're so excited to have you join us today to learn more about data and mapping to support local, regional, and state food systems. My name is Ela Rausch. I work for a consulting firm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I had the pleasure of supporting our panelists and developing a couple of the tools that we're going to be talking about on the webinar today. Wanted to introduce you to our panel experts that you'll be hearing from this afternoon. Annalise Straw is an agricultural marketing specialist with the U.S. Department of Agricultural Marketing Service in the Local and Regional Foods Division. Ellie Bowman is a PhD research scientist at Colorado State University in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. And also joining us today is Becca Jablonski. She is the co-director of the Food Systems Institute and associate professor of agriculture and resource economics at Colorado State University. Wanted to just tell you very briefly the format for our session today. We will be hearing from our presenters. We'll be holding questions until the end. We're going to spend about 20 minutes in small breakout groups. You'll have an opportunity to meet and discuss with your colleagues the food systems work that you're doing in your own state. And then we're going to come back together in a large group to share the highlights from our breakout sessions before we close out. Next slide. So our purpose is threefold today. We're really here to build awareness of the new tools from USDA and Agricultural Marketing Service. We want to serve as connectors to help you connect with other people in other states who are working on using local food systems data and making them more accessible to the public and other interested decision makers. And thirdly, we'd really like to support you in developing public-facing, public policy relevant data visualizations, which we'll be learning how to do today. We have a polling question for you that we would like you to take. So we're going to go ahead and put that on the screen. And while we're waiting for the poll, we'd also like you to introduce yourself in the chat. So if you could tell us your name, your organization, where you're based, and what brought you to the session today. I realize that's a lot. So if you just get your name, org, and location into the chat box, that would be great. It looks like we have folks from all regions of the country today. Thanks again for introducing yourself. And folks are still participating in the poll, so we'll hold out just another second here. If you haven't had a chance yet, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We've got about 10 people who are still responding to the poll. All right. And Libby, I think you're running our poll. Do you want to share the results and tell us who's in the room today? If not, I can go ahead and do it. It looks like I can see the results on the screen. We're pretty equally divided today. We've got about a quarter of us who say that we already have a tool that's been developed and we're looking to update it. About a quarter are in process and have a tool that they are either just starting to plan or underway. 20% said that they have something under consideration, so they're just getting started in their efforts. And then about 20% of us, we don't have anything underway yet, but we assume that if you're here today, that there is some interest. So I think we can go ahead and stop sharing the poll. We do have a survey that we would like you to complete. It's just a 4 short question survey to tell us a little bit about yourself and the type of technical assistance support that you would like to have with mapping. That survey will be available to you while the presenters are talking today, and you can go ahead and respond to that. We'll have about another 20 minutes here to do the survey. And at this time, I would like to go ahead and turn things over to Annalise.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ela. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today. My name's Annalise Straw. Like Ela said, I'm an agricultural marketing specialist with the USDA Local and Regional Foods Division. So before we really dive into the data tools, we wanted to provide a little bit of context to you all about the division at USDA that funded this work and why we at USDA think food systems data access and use is really so important. So the Local and Regional Foods Division is part of the Agricultural Marketing Service, also known to most of you as AMS. And AMS administers programs that create domestic and international marketing opportunities for a variety of US producers. So the division that I'm with, the Local and Regional Foods Division, works with external partners and stakeholders, as well as other USDA agencies, to explore the challenges that food systems stakeholders face by providing research and data that supports market access, transparency, and development. Next slide, please. So we work as a research and data provider, technical assistance provider, and also a convener, all 3 things that were integral to the creation of the project where these data tools came out of. So as a researcher, we work to provide both research and data that supports market access and transparency. As a technical assistance provider, the Local Foods Division works to share what we learned through the research to all interested stakeholders, including grant recipients, farmers market managers, producers, as well as academia and nonprofit partners. And then as a convener, the Local and Regional Foods Division works to provide access to the most relevant and up-to-date information available on local and regional food systems. So we try to act as a central node for networks to collaborate across the food system sectors surrounding a variety of topics, data access being one of them. So we also we try to offer a platform to unify, amplify, and spread the word of the work that's being done at national and regional levels. So as it really relates to food systems data, Our goal is that the data tools you'll hear and learn about today, we want them to really support stakeholders across the food system with program design, business planning, grant writing, advocacy, and figuring out how to support telling the stories of the state of local food and its challenges in a given area. So we've heard from stakeholders that they've leveraged the data tools we're going to focus on to help them better understand their community needs and opportunities. So one quote said, "We've been very fortunate to have been able to leverage data available at localfoodeconomics.com. These indicators from this data set provide important baseline information for our communities and help us to better define the information we collect from people." So next slide, please. So why AMS has funded the development of this data tool that we're discussing and why we're continuing to invest in data projects. So across the USDA and government-wide, there's a push around evidence and organized data operations. So that's really at the root of the work. We're also focused on increased data access and usability because of our role as researcher, data provider, and providing technical assistance. And it's really part of our goal in improving learning about the kind of landscape of different local food sectors and regions. We also use data to support our stakeholders, both from a 30,000-foot view, but also we do deep dives on specific topics, and we want communities to use these tools to gain easier access to relevant local food systems data. And lastly, our focus on increased data usability and improved data access is really rooted in the hope for more comprehensive data on local food systems that helps grant applicants and recipients and supports the use of data in program design, planning, evaluation, and development, which was the primary goal of the two resources that you'll hear about today. So I'll pass it over to Becca, who's going to dive into the project.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Annalise and Ela. Great to be with you all today. So this data resource that we're going to talk about it came out of a larger project that actually has had a few consecutive rounds of funds from the USDA AMS, and it really responded to some of the needs that resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic, and really thinking about how can data help us to understand what's happening and inform our work moving forward. Thanks, Libby, for putting the link in the chat box. Next slide, please, Allie. So I was fortunate to be a co-lead with Ashley Chaffetz, who at the time was at USDA Ag Marketing Service and now is at USDA Food Nutrition Service on the data portion of the project. Don Thilmany was the overall lead. And the data portion of the project had three primary goals: to support and promote equity in data collection and use, to improve access to food systems related data from an array of sources, increase use of data in program planning, evaluation, and decision-making. Next slide, please, Allie. So we were really fortunate because we had what I would say is a dream team to work with of folks who are in the local and regional food systems sector and who represent a huge number of people who work in, I would say, every facet of local and regional food systems. So you can see, for example, the Farmers Market Coalition is represented, the Local Catch Network. We had folks from Farm Fair and Data Elevates to Food Corridor. So it was a big team of folks that think about what are the kinds of data that their stakeholders need to be able to answer the questions that their stakeholders want to answer. Both folks who work along the supply chain, but also people who are embedded in communities. And so, next slide, please. We developed this four-pronged resource that we hope you will go and take a look at localfoodeconomics.com/data. The open access data warehouse, Allie Bowman in a minute is going to talk a lot more about. But I'll just briefly mention here that we have a data equity framework that actually Ela and Abby Long led the development of, along with a bunch of other USDA Ag Marketing Service colleagues. And I think that's a really fantastic resource. And I know with the the new Regional Food Business Center that Colorado State University and Oregon State University are leading, we're really hoping to build from some of those tools, which I think are really fantastic. The Food and Agriculture Mapper and Explorer, FAME, basically takes some of the data that are available in the open access data warehouse and make them more easily accessible to community stakeholders. So Data Elevates led that process, and it's really meant to be just sort of a relatively straightforward mapping tool for communities to use in working on some of the ag marketing service grants, really just trying to make that data more accessible. And the Voices from the Field components, the least developed components, something we hope you all may be interested in contributing to, where we actually are able to document some of the ways in which you all are using the data. And that really helps, I think, to make the data rich, because the data by itself doesn't do much. It's really talking about the stories of how you're using the data to make different decisions or to tell a story in your community. Next slide, please. So the data equity framework, we really thought about what are some of these data equity challenges, and then how do we think about addressing it? So just as an example here, key data measures that are needed but not currently collected, right? And so what we actually include in some of the methodology database, tools that you can actually see on the website talk about what are some of the things that we think are really important to collect that are not currently collected. So what we tried to do there was to acknowledge that everything we need is not available, and that if you only look at what is currently available, that you're missing some of these key ways that you need to be able to tell stories and want to be able to tell stories, and that really does have an impact. The data that lacks context for why differences among racial groups might exist, right? And so that's one of the reasons we tried to include these narratives, right? And make sure we had a place for that. So anyway, I encourage you to go take a look. There's some really rich information there. Next slide, please. Ali's going to talk more about this, but you'll see the data warehouse it's a data storage site housed by GitHub, and it includes relevant publicly available survey instruments, county level data, point level data. And I think also importantly, especially for folks that are more on the research side, it's a way to actually have code that's available. So you'll see Ali's been in charge of that and really tries to make it very transparent and clear about exactly what's included, what's not, how it was formatted, and all of those kinds of things. Next slide, please. And then this is FAME. We're not going to talk a lot about that today, but there's a link to the recorded webinar about using FAME, and we can put that link in the chat box so that if you are interested in thinking about how to use it more, that you have access to that resource. Next slide, please. And with that, Ali, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Becca. So I'm Ali Bauman, and my role on this project was the collector and aggregator of all the data that everybody on the team suggested be included. So there's kind of these different groups of data. So we collected data related to labor, local food sales, business development and infrastructure, community resources, and the nutrition security and food access. So you'll see this is also how the data is separated on the GitHub site. So basically what my goal today is to communicate how you as a researcher or community person can get the data you want off GitHub. So if you're familiar with GitHub, it'll be really easy. And if you're not familiar with GitHub, don't be scared, because it's quite easy to just get the code and it's just download what you need. So you do not need to be familiar with GitHub in order to utilize these data sources. So basically you click on the link, it's on the website and it's listed here, and this will bring you to the GitHub site. So this is basically all the data associated with this project. So you'll see in this first set of folders, this is that same kind of separation of data we talked about before. So in the first folder, that's all the data, all the code and data related to business development and infrastructure. There's one additional folder here called grants that was kind of added a little bit later. So let's say you wanted to get data from the business development infrastructure folder. So you'd click on that folder. Oh, sorry, taking one step back. All of the data in these folders is county level, so it's based on a FIPS code. There's also a set of data that's point level data. Most of the data is county level, but there's some that's point level, and this would be some examples of like food hub location, farmers market location, and these are by lat long coordinates. And all of these data are also aggregated at the county level. So let's say for a point level data set, we have farmers markets. And so this will be lat long coordinates. And then in the data sets above, we've aggregated those so you'd have the number in a county. So what I'm going to talk about mostly today is going to be these in the folders above the county level data, but the point level data is available if it's interesting to you. And lastly, this metadata file, this basically has all the information you'll need to know about what the variables mean. So it's very detailed and will guide you to understand exactly what all the variable names mean. Okay, so let's say you want to get some data from the business infrastructure and development folder. So you click on that folder and it would bring you here. So you see there's two files. There's this .rmd, which is an R Markdown file. I do all my coding in R. Even if you're not familiar with R Markdown files are pretty user-friendly. So I tried to be as explicit as possible. So in Word, so it's like basically a Word document at top and then the code associated with it. So even if you don't know R, I would encourage you to browse those files as you can still get a lot of information. And it's basically exactly where I pulled the data from and then how I manipulated it. So if you wanted to download that file, you just click on it and then it'll bring you down here and you'll see the code will populate on your screen. And then in this top right corner, all you hit is that download raw file and you'll have that R Markdown file. If you don't code in R, you would have to have R on your computer in order to open it. But it's an open source, very easy to get program. But also you don't need the code if that's not of interest. And then the data file, which is probably the most relevant, is the second one. So it's a CSV file, and you do the same thing. You click on it, and then you download the data in this right-hand corner. So then you'll have a CSV file of all the data associated with this folder on your computer. So this is what the data looks like. And note that so for each of those folders, so you have a bunch of different metrics, it's all exactly the same file structure. So if you want to have all of them in one file, you just concatenate or bind the rows. So you could put them all in one data file. So they're all going to start with FIPS. So keep in mind when you save to a CSV file, it drops leading zeros. So a FIPS code should have 5 zeros. So when you import them, make sure you add that leading zero. Otherwise, it'll feel very confusing. So make sure you add the leading zero. You've got county and state names. So if you're merging additional data, if you have FIPS, that's the ideal. If not, there's also county and state names, so you can merge with those. You've got a category, so that's kind of that big folder. And then within that, there's a topic area. All of these have years. For the most part, I imported either the most recent or the most recent couple years. But if you're interested in previous years of data, I'll show you in the next step where you'd find the original data set. This is the variable name and the value. So just for reference, if you're going to use these in your own research, you might want to change the structure of the data. So this is considered long, and a lot of the data we use is wide. So just something to keep in your mind if you're going to utilize the data. And of course, anybody's welcome to ask questions on that. But just know if you want to add all the data together, you just basically stack it because it's exactly the same. So if you want food processing and distribution with food access, you just stack the data and have one large data set. So lastly, I wanted to show you, so on the site, there's something called a README file. The README file on the GitHub site is basically like, here's what's going on. It kind of gives you a map to everything on the project. In the data and code section, we give you a link to our Dropbox folder. So there's some cases where a lot of the raw files, they're too big to be housed on GitHub. So here's all the raw data. It's all publicly available. So you could either follow the links I provide in the code, or here's just all of the raw data sets. And this is where you could find additional years of data. And then one other very good resource that is only available here is this USDA FNS raw data and forms. So Annalise might be able to speak to this a bit more, but basically there's these really rich data sources from FNS that are not available elsewhere. So if you want to browse that, it's an incredibly rich data set or source of data that you're welcome to browse, and that's just part of this site as well. But note that that data is not on the rest of either the map or the other data sets. So that's about the data. So lastly, I just wanted to talk about the process for data updates and what additional data can be included. Annalise, do you want to talk about this, or should I?
I can take it, Allie, thanks. So first I wanted to say there are a couple of questions in the chat about dropping in the links, and all of the screen shares that Allie was showing can be accessed from the local food economics /data. So the GitHub site can be accessed directly from there. The Dropbox can be linked or can be accessed directly from the GitHub. So really that is that localfoodeconomics.com /data is the one kind of link that you need to access all of this. So don't have to keep track of 7 different links. So hopefully that helps clarify a few things. So in terms of updates, we've committed to continuing to update the data warehouse. So this year, Allie's going to do 2 updates and going forward, 1 yearly update. So I think the plan is to do a November and April update this year. And then any available data will be updated as long and additional data sets that have been requested or submitted by users. And that's where you all come in as well. So when it comes to the sorts of data that can be included in the warehouse or submitted for a kind of review and then inclusion in the updates, we're looking for a few very specific things. So we're looking for the owners of the data have to be okay with it being made publicly available on these sites. We need the collection methods to be transparent, replicable, and validated. So this is because if people don't make it clear how the data was collected, then we can't verify that it was done in a really robust way. The data has to be available at the point or county level. And the point level data that is currently in the warehouse is pulled from a local foods directory that my colleagues at the local and regional foods division are creating. And I'll stick a link in the chat because that is a publicly sourced directory. So we recognize it is missing a lot of different locations. And so we need folks to enter their information in that directory in order to make it more robust. So I will also share that in the chat when I'm finished. And then lastly, up until this point, all the data is national in scope. So we do need all the data to be nationwide in scope. However, I say that with the caveat of that we are beginning to think about allowing or putting up some non-national data into the warehouse if it meets all the other requirements. We recognize that there are some data gaps, and so this would help fill some of those gaps and highlight some additional inequities and allow users to really dig into specific locations more. So if you do have non-national data that you think would be really useful to include, please go ahead and submit that for review, but it is not a guarantee that that will end up in the update. So I will pass it back over to Allie for how to actually submit these requests for review. But this is a collective effort, and we really are excited about these updates.
So if you go on to local food economics data, you'll find a tab that's recommendations. And so what you just go in and you just fill out the boxes, your name, organization, and then the recommendation. We've gotten a couple and they've been really great. So I think this is going to be this really rich way that we get data. So we're still in the process of like our systems, but we highly recommend that you help us to make this database bigger and more useful. And so please put your information in here and just know it'll be a few months. It'll be November when they get updated. So if if you do have great ideas, the sooner the better, so we can kind of get all organized and it ends up in the next update would be ideal. And Becca, I'll pass it back to you.
Awesome. And last, before we go into breakouts, so prior to this project and setting up the database and all these things, in part of my role at Colorado State University, I didn't mention that I'm in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics there. I also have co-led our CSU Food Systems Extension team for a number of years. And I used to be involved with our Governor's Food Systems Advisory Council. And in all of those different roles, we recognized that our state had this need to have better sharing of data, better mapping of data in this platform. So I think that I did what probably a lot of other states who are thinking about developing a map did. I called up Maryland and I said, you guys have a great map. How did you start putting this together? Seems like they had gotten calls from a lot of other people, but they were very generous with their time. And so had a great conversation. And some of you may have been on the webinar that they actually hosted through Johns Hopkins University. I don't remember, but maybe a year or two ago, that was showcasing some of these different mapping resources, data platforms that have developed at the state level. And there's several states, I think, that have really great examples. Well, through that process, one of the things that we realized is that every state is going and figuring out how to have the resources to get all of the data together, to figure out how to get the mapping platform set up. And we thought, okay, this is actually a great opportunity to not have every state do it individually, but to have one project through the US Department of Agriculture here actually go and get all of these secondary data indicators. Well, that's not to say that there aren't things that each state's going to want to do collectively or individually. So for example, there's specific data that we get from the Colorado Department of Agriculture that as this USDA project, we cannot go and get for each state. But in general, the secondary data indicators that are available nationally are all now in this, all available through either Dropbox or the GitHub site. And so we really think it's a great opportunity for states to be able to use this information, grab it, and use it in their own mapping platforms, reporting tools. And I can just say as a quick story, because we talked about how important sort of telling those stories, that during the pandemic, or actually pretty early on in the pandemic, I got a call from the Department of Homeland Security and actually also the Department of Defense. They were really starting to think about, okay, how do we actually know where all of the locations of different food processing facilities are? And the place where they found this was on our Colorado Food Systems site. And so it was really cool that that's like an example of, okay, yes, like this was actually available for folks to be able to use because it was there. So I think that's a cool example of a stakeholder I never ever would have thought would have come to our food systems map actually making use of it. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ela now, but thanks so much for this discussion.
Thanks, Becca. We wanted to give you an opportunity to ask our panelists some questions. And I know that we have a technical question in the chat about the CVS files that maybe someone can address in the chat, but I'm wondering, does anybody on the call have any questions about the tools you just learned about? Feel free to put them in the chat or take yourself off mute and say hello and ask your question. If there aren't any questions, we'd also love to hear what you as a state or community are working on right now. About half of you said that you had a map that was in progress or a reporting tool that was in progress or one that you're looking to update. Would love to hear from you about how that's going and where you're at. Question to the group. How was the Colorado map developed? And was it made in R?
So no, it was not made in R. We are actually in the process of completely redoing it. We just hired a consultant who's going to be redoing it for us. And Allie, maybe you can correct me here, but I believe he's actually going to be using Tableau, which seems to be pretty popular right now in terms of what other groups are doing. Is that right, Allie?
Well, so the FAME was made with Tableau, and I'm not sure what the previous map, the Colorado map, was made with. I do know a lot of people use FAME because it's the most cost-effective method. It's the least customizable, but it seems like the most cost-effective way to make both tables visualizations, which include maps. But I don't think, Becca, that's what the Colorado map was done with.
No, no, I meant the new version. The Colorado map was all done in this completely customized way that I don't recommend doing. So we ended up having somebody in the Department of Engineering build it for us from scratch. And the problem is that it was then like a couple people who knew how to work those tools. And I think this time we're trying to make something that is a little bit more open source and transparent. So that's why I thought they were using Tableau, but we're really in the very, very early stages of this. But I can confirm that, but I think Allie's right about many of the places I've seen are using Tableau because it's easy.
So lots of great technical questions in the chat. Wanted to remind people to complete the survey. That's where we're going to be able to get your address to communicate with you in the future. And we can make sure that we answer the TA questions that you have. I want to make sure that we have time for breakouts. And we have a Google Doc that we'd like to share with you that has 4 key questions where we'll all have an opportunity to be recorders and we can type in our thoughts and answers. And our 4 questions today, we would like to know where you're at with your data and mapping efforts, what you're envisioning and what's worked to date. We'd like to do a little bit of talking about equity and how we might embed equity into data mapping and reporting tools. We're interested in knowing a little bit more about the types of technical issues that you're running into, where you'd like help, and if you're in a position to help others. And finally, we're interested in knowing how we can use data to tell deeper and richer stories, to quantify food system needs, and to illustrate impacts. And so those are the questions we have. We're going to send you into breakouts so that you'll have a chance to meet and chat with your colleagues. And then we'll come back at about 55 after to do a quick report out about what we learned and heard, and we'll close out. Welcome back, everyone. We just have a few minutes here before we close out. And if you're like our group, we barely got into the questions, but we did have a chance to introduce ourselves to each other and learn more about the work that each of us is working on. Just wanted to give an opportunity to share out in a large group. And I'm just wondering, anyone, if you'd like to share either the most interesting thing you heard in your group or where you see an opportunity for us to work together in the future. I know that a lot of us are working on similar projects and similar challenges, and we'd love to hear from you. Anyone? This is a quiet group. Josh, you look like you have something you want to say.
Well, I came in late to the meeting, so forgive me. So I didn't really get to hear a lot of your stories, and I know we're all working within an idea of a food system initiative. For us, it's Hillsborough County, Florida, Homegrown Hillsborough. Are you familiar with that program at all?
See some nodding head.
The idea is that we can coordinate with other food system programs, perform outreach, community engagement, connecting the dots within the county and the greater Tampa Bay region of having a more secure food system, and just allowing the stakeholders to bring what that looks like for them. You know, perhaps they have a piece of land, perhaps they'd like to have a compost site, you know, perhaps they just need more marketing to go to the hyper local community around them, so that we grow our own health, if you will, from soil to the home table within the community. How do we build that framework? How do we put the food hub together and then make a system that's scalable all across the country? And that's what we've been working on. I'm just part of it, but it's exciting work. So I don't know, how can we partner with you guys and what you're doing in your projects?
Great questions, Josh. How do we partner and how do we go to scale? Other comments, questions from the group? And I'd certainly invite our room moderators to chime in on what rose to the top, if you have things that you recall from your room.
I have a comment / question. So if I don't really know how to phrase it, but if USDA is like, you know, USDA is interested in seeing more food system maps. There was a comment about Homeland Security in Colorado being interested in this information, like, hey, COVID let Homeland Security know that like it might be important to know where some food assets exist, right? Or food processing, I think was what they were interested in. If there's national interest in this, and the value is being more noticed, is there a possibility of, at the federal level, like USDA supporting states, counties, et cetera, to like providing some of the basic information so that not everyone is like starting from scratch, right? Because some of the information, I guess, has to be generated at the local level, right? But some of it is information that's available through existing databases. And could there be some like basic boilerplate mapping that's done by USDA or some way federally, so that at the state level, each state or each county only has to add what's missing that's not already available from? Does that make any sense? Like, why should we all
Totally.
the funding to do this from scratch if, like, you know, maybe 20, I'm just pulling numbers, but like maybe 20-25% of it, what everyone wants in their food system map is available from the federal government or through, you know.
And I'm so sorry if it wasn't clear, but that is exactly what we've done. So
I'm
that's
sorry, I
all
missed
of
it.
the
Didn't understand that.
No, and I'm really sorry if that wasn't clear. So basically what happened was there are over 300 of these indicators that are available if you go to localfoodeconomics.com. But for some people, like, getting access to that data is challenged. And so this FAME tool was developed to make it easier for folks that want to just start with looking at the map. So there are a good set of curated indicators in the FAME tool right now. but not all of them are there. The challenge comes when you're exactly right. There's certain data that are not available at the national level. And so like in Colorado, we've had to go to our Department of Agriculture and actually request specific types of information that's only collected at the state level, but it's exactly that. And then Annalise, as I know you're not the only one, there's some confusion in the chat box as well. Annalise also mentioned that there's the USDA local foods directory. So all of those data are included in the GitHub. They're included in, I think, Pieces of Fame. The challenge with those data is that because they're publicly sourced, there are going to be food hubs or CSAs that are missing from that list. And so one of the things that we hope all of the local partners are going to do is to continue to encourage their partners to actually make sure that they're putting their information into those resources. And then we'll get in all of these places. But I think the key piece here is to try to reduce the burden on local partners and state partners. And also that so many of our communities, like in Joshua's example, so many of our communities are going out and doing survey work. And there's places you have to do those surveys, but there's also sometimes questions that are asked that are already available in those other databases. And so we want to reduce the respondent burden as much as possible.
Thank you.
Nice, thanks.
All great comments. Sue,
I have
looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question for AMS. I mean, I have a background in technology and I have a degree in math, so I'm like this data geek, right? But my colleagues aren't, right? And, you know, of all the different grant funding that comes out from AMS, what is the avenue where we could ask for funding to provide a staff person in a state the size of Texas whose job is really to pay attention to the data, the quality, where the gaps are, make sure they're filled, to work with Colorado and the other states to be that data coordinator, right? I mean, I understand the value of it, but my wife is pressing me to work less in a couple of years. So I'm, you know, really thinking seriously about who's going to kind of take the lead on this, who would thrive in the space the way that I do.
I think that's a great point, Sue. And I think that thinking about the capacity for continuous upkeep and like you mentioned in our group, how even the AMS directories is not as robust or as timely as it should be because it is publicly sourced. And so really how do we maintain the relevance of all of this data is something that's really important. And I think we're talking about on the AMS side, but I think in terms of finding the funding, we see this as a possible avenue for the business centers that are popping up about how we can really take these region and place specific gaps and needed areas of support and think about how we can find that source of funding for you. So I jotted that down as we continue to develop them, and also thinking through different grant opportunities as well.
Well, we're about 5 minutes after our end of our call, and we wanted to thank all of you for sticking with us till the very end. We'd really like, if you can, to complete that short 4-question survey in Qualtrics. The link is in the chat. That'll give us your email address. We didn't do registration for this, so we'd like to be able to reach out to you in the future, share these links with you, see if we have an opportunity to reconvene. So that is your avenue for making sure that you get future announcements. We'll also continue to leave this Google Doc open with the questions. So after our call today, if you have some thoughts and would like to respond to those questions, you can go ahead and jump online and share your thoughts. Thanks again to our panelists for presenting such great information today. And thank you to our attendees for sharing all of the great work that you're doing. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thanks so much, everyone. It's just us.
Okay.
Sorry
Yeah,
about
there
that
were lots of us.
issue with the downloading the CSV files. It's different on my computer, but Libby, hopefully people figured it out.
Hopefully, yeah.
I gave
it's-
some. But maybe we should put that, so basically I can't test it out on my computer because mine just automatically downloads. It must be the settings I have. So if everybody could go and explain their different problems and solutions, if we could put that, I could maybe put it in the README file
Mhm.
somewhere. So if I could get a little help on the challenges with that. You know
It was
what
such an
oh, go-
interesting, oh,
Sorry,
sorry,
go ahead.
Allie. No, just it was so interesting because there were some like real like data nerdy people who like wanted to get into specifics. I think they just wanted Allie to talk like the whole time. And then there were some people who I think were just like overwhelmed by the data. So it was like such an interesting thing of like, I don't know how you do these webinars where you like have a good middle point.
And I think like if you're intimidated by seeing the CSV and HTML, then you shouldn't really be in the GitHub site.
I know in my breakout room, I mostly focused on letting people just introduce themselves and talk about what they were working on, because I'm hoping people will look each other up on LinkedIn or find a way to reach out in the future.
My room was like crickets.
Oh,
Nobody, yeah.
I made my room do a round robin, so they would.
How
at
did you
least-
do it? I just failed. I think I've never done one of these and I know I didn't. So how did you get them to talk?
I had everyone introduce themselves and start out with the first question of where they were at and what they were working on, and had people popcorn it over to the next person. So
Okay,
it got everyone in the room a chance to talk.
got it. Okay, did you tell them
yeah.
to take their video off or on?
Everyone had their video on. Was your room
Everyone
video
had their-
dark? Oh,
Everyone had their
no.
video dark. It was this like
Oh.
nothing.
Allie,
You
you
know
might
what
have
I
had people who actually were tuned into the webinar and multitasking and doing something else. I feel like
I
that's the
think
reason
so.
why people leave camera off.
Yes.
My
I have, oh,
no, I was just gonna say that my room was pretty chatty, but I had Sue in there. She always helps break the ice. But they talked a lot about kind of like things unrelated to mapping, like just a lot of like general things that like we need to just think about in terms of food systems equity, but that didn't necessarily like relate to the map, like or even a mapping project, like a lot about how to make sure that urban growers have access to the policies that they need that support urban growers, like things like that. But it was a pretty good conversation. But Texas is creating a directory, in not necessarily a map, but they are starting to create a directory of connecting the consumer with the buyer, which is interesting. And then they had a lot of people. There were a few people from Texas, and they had a lot of comments about the local food directories. And I was like, that's not my project. That's not this project. I cannot talk about that. Which gets
We
people
should highlight those though. I really think on our website, we should have like a list of just like the websites that other states are doing. And then like people could add it there because like that would
I
be
think
great to
so.
see.
Yeah, and Ohio, that person from Ohio
Yeah.
put that link in.
Minnesota has a great one. Yeah, and the other thing I thought that really, which I feel like I knew already, but everybody is having people go out and get the exact same data. Like, so it really is like, I think this can be such a great resource. Like, especially I heard from several people in my room, well, we have master's students from X university that are going and like collecting these and getting these data from like all the USDA places.
so one of the women who participated the most, she said her issue, which is what most states' issue is where to house the data